So the subject in front of us is leading change within yourself. And I want to persuade you here today that change within yourself is absolutely possible. My evidence is the amount of change that you've already been through. Some of it you initiated. In other instances, it may feel that it happened to you. Whatever the dynamic here, you've changed. You're simply not the same person you were 20 years ago. In some ways, you're different. You see the world differently. You're aware of things you weren't aware of. Physiologically, you're different. Emotionally, you may be different too. What's important to you may have shifted. So these changes have been happening to you. And if the future's like the past, will continue happening to you. In this part of the program, we want to look a little bit about some changes that have happened and that could happen. And I hope that you will have a bit more clarity about how that can happen and the changes you may like to see in the future. So we start by looking backwards a little. And I want to invite you to begin by thinking about, letting come to mind, 3 big changes that have happened in your life. 3 big changes. Whatever they might be, whether they're professional, whether they're personal, in your family, whether they're geographic in some way, whether they're to do with new people appearing in your life or people moving out of your life, additional responsibilities, whatever they might be. 3 big changes that have already happened in your life. So let them come to mind, and as they come to mind also, I want to invite you to think about, okay, what's the impact been of those changes on who you are now? So you might have an example. You moved jobs from one firm to another. You got this new position, maybe the one you're in now, and it opened up new possibilities for you, and it's enabled you to. Or there could be something dramatic. There is for many people in our pasts a different change. So in a moment, I'm going to invite you to pause the module, give us a bit of time to reflect and think. 3 big changes in your life and the impact for each of them that's had on you and on the person you are today. The impact may be small or huge. Ready, steady, reflect. Pause now. Now you've got some sense of those which are all in your past and some awareness of the impacts that they may have had. I want to invite you to think about some people who've had an impact on you. We started just now with change as such. A big change happened. Let's think now about people who've had a big impact on you. Maybe your current boss or a previous boss. Maybe a teacher. Maybe a family member. Who has had a positive impact? In other words, a change that's affected you. Who's changed you and the person, helped to form the person you are now. Apart from yourself, that is. So let them come to mind. It doesn't matter exactly maybe who they are, but just let them come to mind now. Who are they? Who are these people? Say it may be a teacher who believed in you, a family member. Mothers and fathers often have a big impact. Not always positive, of course, but there'll be positives in there. Teachers, colleagues, friends, whoever they are. Who are they? How did they do it? How did they do it? What was it? Was it something they said or something they did? Was it some example that they showed you or some direct communication? So what was it that they did? And as you think about that, as you let that come back, as you remember that, how did they do it? Was it some eye contact, some belief, some something? Was it purely positive? Was it a kind of a little bit more kind of demanding of you? What was it? How did they do it that really hit you, reached something in you and had an impact on you? So whether there are 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, let them come to mind. Who was it? What did they do? How did they do it? And if this comes clear, if there was a message that they gave you, whether or not they gave you words, what was that message? So just as before, give yourself some time to reflect, to think, and to address those questions and see what comes up for you now. Okay. So we've now looked at 2 different kinds of change in your past, and we're going to look at a third before we come to the present and look towards the future. So the next kind of change in your past, personal change, is about changes you've decided to make in yourself, or you've wanted to make in yourself and you've made, or maybe wanted to make in yourself and you maybe you haven't fully made. That's okay as well. So if you remember back, I don't know whether you ever make New Year's resolutions. They don't always work. Or if at some point you've decided, you know what, I'm really going to make a change here. I'm going to make a shift. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be more focused. I'm going to not get wound up about this stuff. I'm going to, whatever it is, you've decided or you've realized that you can make some change in yourself. You're going to be more disciplined. You're going to get on with it. Whatever that might be, at some point in your past, you may have decided to make some changes in yourself, to really work on change. Now, whether you were really successful in that or not, don't mind at the moment. Both cases are fine. But let, if you will, some instances come to mind. If, as you remember, you realize, wow, I've never tried to make any changes in myself, then that's also interesting. And shortly we'll come to making changes for the future. If you realize, wow, I've really worked on this and I haven't really got anywhere yet, then I salute you for working on it. That's fine. And if there's some stuff where you've made some shifts, you know that these days you're calmer or more present, or you can laugh more, or you don't beat yourself up as much as you did. You know, I can think back to when I was a teenager and I used to really give myself a hard time for whatever it was. And I do that much less these days. For myself, and I'll just buy a bit of space for you here and share a little bit more, I used to get more worked up, worried, anxious, fretful than I do these days. A huge change. Well, I've had many years to work on this stuff and I'm familiar with great stuff, so I've got an advantage. But whatever it is, I want to invite you to pause for a third time and think about changes you've wanted to make in yourself. Some of them you've made a lot, some of them you might have made a little. Maybe there are none in those categories. Some of them you've wanted to and it hasn't shifted yet. That's okay. Up to 3 categories. What's the change you wanted to make? And how far have you got with it so far? That's the task. Give yourself some time, whether this is going to be 3 minutes or 3 hours, completely up to you. Give yourself some time to reflect and let this come up, and you may learn something about how you have and haven't been leading change in yourself. So I don't know what's come up for you just now when you've looked at how you've been leading change in yourself when you've decided to make a shift or change. Or even what came up for you on the previous exercise when you thought about, well, people who've had an impact on me and how they've done it. Or even on the first part where you looked at changes that have happened in your life. But at all those different levels, you've been going into memory and thinking about what's been shifting and what's been changing for you. And you may have noticed some levels of resistance in yourself. You may have noticed how that resistance has been broken through. And you may have a sense of how you'd like to move forward. So we'd like to invite you to think of yourself as someone who's a bit more fluid, capable of change than you might have thought you were. And we'll introduce this process now. When you think about changing yourself, we want to bring back in something you might have heard from us before: awareness, connection, transformation. Want to invite you to be aware of, well, what's changing and what hasn't been changing, and to be aware of what could change. To have the idea of connecting with those elements as well. So connecting with the possible future. And to have the idea, the acknowledgement, the acceptance that transformation, which is a big word for change, is always possible. In the next part of this program, we'll start to explore how you can lead change in yourself in future.